Good evening. My name is Steve Tinney, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Penn Museum. Many thanks to all of you for joining tonight's installment of our Archaeology in Action series, featuring findings from archaeological projects across the globe. Our next lecture will be on Wednesday, May 7th, and will feature Dr. Kimberly Max Brown discussing the Eternal Soldier program under the title Connecting Warriors Across Time Through Archaeology. I'm sure you will have questions tonight, and you can just put them in the chat, and Tina will moderate them at the end. So let's meet our speaker, Dr. Josef Wegner. Joe is a professor of Egyptian archaeology, current department chair in the Department of Middle Eastern Languages and Cultures at the University of Pennsylvania, and in fact, one of my longest standing colleagues, because Joe and I were actually hired into the department, which had a different name back then, in the same year. So it's really enjoyable to be introducing Joe this evening and looking forward to his lecture. He's also curator in the Egyptian section of the Penn Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, and he received his PhD in 1996 on the topic of the development of the Osiris cult at Abydos. He has been excavating at Abydos since 1994, where he and his team have been documenting the ruins of the funerary complex of Pharaoh Senwosret III of Egypt's 12th dynasty. These excavations include the Middle Kingdom town of Wasut, as well as the royal cemetery named Anubis Mountain. Discoveries at Anubis Mountain include the tomb of Seneb-Kay, as well as other tombs of rulers of the Abydos dynasty. Dr. Wegner's work has been focused primarily on the archaeology of Egypt's Middle Kingdom and Second Intermediate period, and his books include, and I'm only going to mention a small selection here, the Mortuary Temple of Senwosret III at Abydos, the Sphinx that traveled to Philadelphia, the story of the colossal Sphinx of Ramses the Great in the Penn Museum, and King Seneb-Kay's tomb and the necropolis of the Lost Dynasty at Abydos. Together with Dr. Josef Wegner and other members of the Penn Museum's Egyptian section, Joe has been co-curating for I don't know how many years now. I've been in most of those meetings as well. Seems like a long time, but he's been working decades before that even on what is becoming the complete reinstallation of the museum's Ancient Egypt and Nubia galleries. I'm happy to say that the construction work is on track. It'll be finished this summer, and we look like we're on track to open the first level of the new galleries in fall 2026, which will be a huge excitement for all of us. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Josef Wegner, who will talk about uncovering the social and political history of ancient Egypt. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for joining us. Steve, thanks for introducing my very grandiose sounding title this evening. I'm going to be touching a little bit on that topic of how archaeology contributes to reconstructing social and political history. Obviously not all of ancient Egyptian social and political history, but a few aspects of it that these excavations that I'm going to be talking about happen to touch upon. I am speaking today about ongoing excavations at the site of Abydos in Upper Egypt. And I thought I'd start with something that's just been in the news very recently, which was a very exciting discovery we made this winter season. In January of 2025, we completed the initial excavations of a new royal tomb discovered at the site of Anubis Mountain at South Abydos that I'll be discussing today. Here you see the excavations underway of what turned out to be a very impressive structure, and has added a new chapter and new insights onto a particular phase of time called the Second Intermediate Period of Egypt. So I thought this would be a good kind of starting point, this new discovery, this new tomb. A shot of the interior of it. It was a very exciting moment when we realized that we had come upon yet another royal tomb at Abydos. Abydos is a place where there are a good number of royal tombs. Many of the famous ones date to the early history of Egypt, the beginning of the dynasties. The necropolis of the first pharaohs famously is at Abydos, but the area that I'm talking about today, Anubis Mountain, as we've been uncovering in recent years, is really establishing itself as one of the major known royal necropoli of ancient Egypt. And we have a whole series of tombs, at least 14 to date, and possibly more, as I'll talk about. So here's the interior of the recently discovered tomb. And it is a little bit still of a mystery tomb. Here, another view of the interior with its stone burial chamber, some quite grand brick components to the tomb, as well as remnants of decoration, as you can see there on the right-hand side, depicting various deities and also the remnants of what originally was the identification of the tomb occupant, the king, currently under kind of investigation, shall we say, the mystery owner of this particular tomb. Why is this tomb there? So I just want to turn briefly away from this royal necropolis where this new tomb was identified, and just give you a little background on the particular site where we're excavating. Many of you are familiar with it. Some others of you may not be. Abydos, which you see here on the map on the upper left-hand side, is a site in the upper southern part of Middle Egypt. Now you can see it's on the western side of the Nile, a little bit north of the famous city and monuments of Thebes, where the famous Valley of the Kings and Karnak and other monuments are. Abydos lies just a little bit to the north and west of there. Abydos is a huge site which has thousands of years of archaeology associated with it. One of the anchor points of Abydos was its development in the early history of Egypt as a royal necropolis site. Here, in this particular part of what we call the low desert, which is the flat, sort of undulating, sandy terrain that leads up to the high desert cliffs that you see here that flank the Nile Valley. The low desert runs between the Nile floodplain and the high desert cliffs. In this particular area, this was where the first pharaohs were buried, as well as a number before them, many centuries before them, there was a long developing pre-dynastic or prehistoric necropolis. And this is a place that kind of anchored the importance of Abydos for many millennia. Over much of the history of Egypt, Abydos was associated with the veneration of the funerary deity Osiris, or Osiris Gentiamentiu, as he was often specified. Osiris, foremost of the Westerners, Lord of Abydos. The Egyptians believed that he had been actually buried at Abydos in the context of this necropolis of the first pharaohs. And the site developed over many thousands of years, temples and tombs. You can see many of the structures there lining the edge of the floodplain that were added by successive kings and other members of society over time. The part of Abydos that's of interest to us today is what's called South Abydos. It's a sort of a slice of low desert, which is kind of sandwiched between the high desert cliffs here, the edge of the floodplain. And this is a place where in a sort of a classical era of ancient Egypt, a time of great powerful pharaohs called the Middle Kingdom, we have one particular king who had a special interest apparently in Abydos. His name is Senwosret III. And he built a mortuary complex that includes a tomb at the base of the high desert cliffs in this area that we know anciently was called the Mountain of Anubis, or Anubis Mountain. Here we see the location of that tomb inside of a large brick enclosure. Aligned with it was a mortuary temple or funerary temple at the edge of the floodplain, and then also a town site and many other different components that were kind of arrayed around these kind of anchoring structures. So this is the king that established this place about 1850 BC as a particularly significant part of Abydos. And this is what we've been focusing on really for the last several decades now. Since the late 1990s, we've been progressively excavating the different components of this complex. Here on the left, you see just some views over the landscape there from the foot of the cliffs. You can see kind of the sandy desert terrain, which characterizes this area of Abydos. There's the Nile floodplain across the river, actually, on the other side of the Nile. You can see the cliffs on the eastern side. Up here, you see what we understand today was viewed by the ancient Egyptians as a kind of a sacred mountain. It is the limestone cliffs that rise up to about 800 feet in this particular area, this particular sort of prominent part of which was identified in the time of Senwosret III as the Mountain of Anubis. And here you see it recorded in a clay impression of a stamp seal, which was actually used for the early phase of this royal necropolis, or what became a royal necropolis, anchored here by the tomb of Senwosret III. So there you see the jackal god Anubis on his shrine. There below is a little kind of a double-lobed hieroglyph. That's the mountain hieroglyph. It reads Ju Anpu. In Egyptian, just the mountain of Anubis. And they seem to have believed that somehow Anubis, symbolically, his powers were kind of embodied in the peak of this mountain. And the tomb for Senwosret III was built at the base of it and actually extending beneath the mountain of Anubis. Here you see some of the other components a little closer. So there's the T-shaped tomb enclosure that I mentioned, the tomb of Senwosret III. Aligned with that is a mortuary temple at the edge of the floodplain. And then this quite large and still only partially known, partially excavated town site, which was a state-planned installation for housing priests and administrators and personnel that maintained the temple. The temple focused on the cult of the king, presumably buried in this tomb at the base of the cliffs. All of this in ancient times had a specific name. It was called Wachsut Chakara Ma'acheru Emabju. As you see in these hieroglyphs, translated, that is, enduring are the places of King Chakare, or Senwosret III, true of voice in Abydos. So this is the place we've been investigating for a good number of years. A lot of our activity has been focused down on this area on the edge of the floodplain, where we have the ruins of the mortuary temple. You can see the excavations of this that went on in the late 1990s, early 2000s. We completed the temple itself years ago, but still in recent seasons have been investigating areas around it where there's a lot of evidence for industrial activities. We discovered a bakery and brewery complex, for instance. And then further to the south are the ruins of this quite large town site that includes a number of elite buildings, including a sort of palatial scale residential complex that was used by the mayors who ran this town site. And you can see blocks of other houses that compose the town site. We spent quite a lot of time in recent seasons. I'm not going to really talk about it today in too much detail, but the last 2 years we've done extensive excavations, essentially kind of rescuing all of the archaeology that's in the accessible areas of the town site. You can see the ancient town runs up directly against modern houses. There's a modern town that overlays much of the ancient ruins. Nevertheless, we can excavate up to very close the edges of the modern houses, and you can see these ancient brick buildings coming out. This is excavations from just 2023. This last summer in 2024, we also had extensive excavations, and you can see how these buildings come out of the ground right below the surface in this particular site. You step back thousands of years into the time of the Middle Kingdom. So, 4,000 years back in time, you're suddenly in these buildings of that age. So we've been investigating these quite a bit, and a lot of information has come out about the people, the community that lived here. This was a town that was inhabited over about 3 centuries, from let's say roughly 1850 BC to about 1550 BC. when some changes in the local kind of settlement structure happened. Just to highlight two individuals involved in our teamwork who've been very important recently, and especially in the town excavations. Current PhD student Roland Long, who's a PhD student in Middle Eastern languages and cultures. He's been working on aspects of the town site, and there he is with team member Ayman Damarani, who's been a fundamental part of our work in recent years. They're standing on the roof of one of the modern houses overlooking where the ancient town was. But over there in the distance behind them, you see these shadows at the base of the cliff. This is Anubis Mountain. This is the location of the royal necropolis that I now want to take us back to take a look at the excavations of that site. Bringing us back to Anubis Mountain, here's just a view of one of our foremen, Raya Sabir, standing there proudly on top of one of the ancient limestone walls of one of the tombs. Anubis Mountain is the name for this huge kind of sprawling royal necropolis that developed at the base of the mountain of Anubis, that was anchored originally by this nucleus tomb built by Senwosret III. Over successive generations, as you go forward into the later part of the Middle Kingdom, through the 12th dynasty and then into the 13th dynasty, which is roughly the 18th century BC, through into what's called the Second Intermediate Period. We have a whole succession of kings now that we know had an interest in this place, and they came and they added their tombs. So the time frame we're talking about is roughly 1850 to, let's say, about 1600 BC in absolute dates. Focusing a little bit more on the necropolis itself, here we see the basic structure. There's this really massive brick enclosure, which has a vaguely sort of T shape to it, as you can see here, with the wider part of the T running up right against the base of the cliffs. This is the structure that housed in the upper end the entrance to this monstrous tomb that was built there. One of the biggest tombs in Egypt, dedicated to Senwosret III. It's about 200 meters in total length, so roughly 800 feet or so. It goes down over 100 feet from the desert surface down into the bedrock and then extends beneath the mountain of Anubis. And you can see the scale of that tomb. It's really massive. Here, as I'll talk about in just a little bit, are some of the other royal tombs, which comparatively speaking are quite a bit smaller, but nevertheless still impressive. So I thought I'd start with this and just give you a little bit sense of the excavations of this tomb. This has really been a long, ongoing process of excavation at Abydos because of the scale of this tomb and also the scale of damage that was affected to it by ancient tomb robbers. It has been a long and challenging excavation process in this isometric cutaway. You can see the basic structure of it. It descends into the bedrock. And then there's different components, different chambers and passages that lead sequentially into the final part of it, which is the burial compartments, which, as you can see, are sort of built on this curving passageway that's directly beneath the mountain of Anubis itself. It seems to be very intentional. There was an idea probably that the inner part of this tomb, the burial of the king, was meant to be directly beneath the mountain of Anubis. Here, just another example of one of the clay impressions that has the name of the mountain of Anubis, or Anubis Mountain for a shorter version of saying it. Anyway, so this tomb is very significant. It's been it's taken many years to excavate it. I put in just a few slides to give a sense of the scale of the architecture of this particular monument. It's cut into the bedrock. It's built, however, with lining, masonry lining of different types of stone. The limestone blocks that you see here composing this chamber, which is the first major space. This is all limestone that was brought up from quarries just to the south of where modern Cairo is located. So from hundreds and hundreds of miles away, fine quality limestone was brought to construct parts of this tomb. Other sections of it were built out of granite and quartzite, equally brought from hundreds of miles away from other quarries. So it's really, as I said, a monstrous structure. And we've been excavating it for well over 10 years. The scale of the chambers is really massive. There's huge investment in the architecture of this tomb in not just creating sort of grand architectural spaces, but also protecting the burial chamber, the location, presumably of the burial of the king. For instance, this big blocking stone that you see here toppled down out of its original position, which was up here. Ancient tomb robbers who had broken into this tomb dislodged this blocking stone and broke into the inner end of the tomb and proceeded to rob it in ancient times. So we are following in the footsteps of ancient robbers, dealing with the wreckage that they left behind, looking for any bits and pieces of material that remain from them. As I said, it's still an ongoing process. We're almost finished, but not quite finished with this monster tomb of Senwosret III. Some of the inner chambers, as you can see here, are quite damaged. Some of the chambers are in quite good condition, ones that the robbers kind of passed through and just broke parts of. Other chambers were very badly attacked with the goal of locating treasure and hidden chambers. And you can see this particular chamber with these beautiful red quartzite floor blocks and wall stones. These are the original wall blocks. You see they're all dislodged and the debris left by tomb robbers. All of this takes a lot of investment and work, and especially that far into the tomb, it becomes increasingly difficult to work. So we're still investigating this tomb, although we have mostly finished the excavations of it. And we're in the process now of actually doing restoration, sort of conservation work to some of the better preserved parts of it, as well as kind of amelioration of the work on the masonry of some of the more damaged parts of it. So here you see one of the large quartzite blocks being moved within the tomb to another location to allow that work to happen. As I already mentioned, so one of the things we contend with in the excavations at Anubis Mountain is the reality that royal tombs in ancient Egypt were targets for ancient tomb robbers who discovered them through various techniques. Sometimes there was oral traditions and local people knew, where these kinds of things were to be found. In other cases, tomb robbers were very capable in just locating them, reading, indications on the surface as to whether there might be something there. So in many of these tombs, in fact, the majority of the ones we've excavated, there is significant damage by tomb robbers. This is a nice illustration. My wife Jennifer gave me this years ago, and I'd like to throw it into lectures occasionally. This is actually how I kind of picture the tomb robbers, as a kind of motley crew breaking into these beautifully equipped ancient royal burial places. Really, they were looking for treasure. At least the initial robbers were looking for gold and other valuable materials, but they did leave a lot of wreckage behind them. In many cases, though, they probably weren't quite such a motley crew as you have depicted here in this image. When you excavate these royal tombs, you do actually come to a kind of an appreciation of the capability of the ancient tomb robbers in reading the ground and finding things. What we've discovered in the necropolis at Anubis Mountain is, in fact, it really reflects how tomb robbery was a major industry in ancient Egypt. And there are even cases where royalty, kings and high status officials were sponsoring the process of tomb robbery. And within Anubis Mountain itself, there's evidence that some of these large and richly equipped tombs, like this one of Senwosret III, were actually robbed by state-sponsored robbery. So there would have been large groups of individuals under the employment of high-status officials in a period of time where there would have been motivation and the state, the administrative structure could support that. They were actually sponsored in the process of tomb robbery. So that's an interesting part of the investigation of the tombs themselves. And they often left interesting material. These are actually all pottery vessels left by tomb robbers. This beautiful painted vessel from the late Roman Byzantine, early Byzantine period. Some of the robbers that were inside the tomb of Senwosret III. And what we can see is that there were actually two major phases of robbery, let's say, call it more broadly, in this period called the Second Intermediate Period, which in fact, as I'm going to turn to in just a second, is also the period where additional kings were adding their tombs at South Abydos already within that period. Some of these really big tombs were being entered and robbed, and some of the material coming out of them was probably being recycled and reused by some of the kings ruling in this era, the Second Intermediate Period, right after the end of the Middle Kingdom. Later on, we have a lot of activity in the Roman and Byzantine periods of an interest in taking a lot of the masonry away. They probably were finding valuables, but there was a particular interest in the beautiful masonry, like the structures I showed you, the chambers in the tomb of Senwosret III, the limestone, quartzite, and granite. They seem to have been using it as a kind of a stone quarry. So this is a Roman period amphora, and one with Coptic graffito on the rim of it. So we can reconstruct these different phases of tomb robbery, and also the process of excavation. We're really contending with the debris left by tomb robbers. We have to go through that very carefully, and oftentimes robbers decided to leave things that were not of interest to them, but are of significance to archaeologists in reconstructing the history of the place. Just another view inside the tomb of Senwosret III. This is the canopic chest of the king. You can see the scale of it. This is the stone box that originally contained the actual smaller canopic chest, which would have been probably a gilded or painted sort of cubic shaped container that then contained the canopic jars with the inner organs of the king. That particular feature of the tomb was pulled out by tomb robbers. As you can see, it's not its original location. There's the box of it and the lid of it just kind of shoved there in the corner of this one particular space. And you can see the scale of it there. So that gives you a little bit of flavor for the excavation of the monster tomb of Senwosret III, this kind of anchoring tomb for the Anubis Mountain necropolis. What has really been of great interest to us over the course of the last decade especially, though, is this area that you see here in the red oval. You can see there's a cluster of many different structures that developed off of the edge of the T-shaped enclosure here. We have in the later Middle Kingdom, a series of tombs that were built by several very powerful kings of the 13th dynasty. Two primary figures that we attribute two of these two are two brother kings by the name of Nefer-Hotep I and his brother, who succeeded him, Sobek-Hotep IV. We also have a structure that we attribute to actually a third brother. There were three brothers that ruled in succession. There's a brother called Sa-Hathor, and we have the remains of actually an unfinished enclosure that we believe was under construction during the very short reign of the third brother, Sa-Hathor. And these particular kings seem to have been interested in connecting themselves in death with this preceding monarch, Senwosret III. And then it's this area where Nefer-Hotep I, Sobek-Hotep IV built their tombs, that we have this cluster of tombs that develops in the Second Intermediate Period. And this is what's labeled here and what we identify as the Second Intermediate Period Royal Necropolis. It includes a group of tombs that you see here. And then this one, which is the most interesting of this particular group, the tomb of King Seneb-Kay, that we discovered and excavated in 2014. So this area is extremely interesting. What it reflects is kind of the later development of the necropolis. It's kind of full expansion over several centuries as a royal burial ground. Here we're just zoomed in a little bit closer, so you can see these really big, I mean, quite massive subterranean structures inside of brick enclosures. This one with the largest enclosure, and then the main cluster of second intermediate period tombs, and this one here, right adjacent to the tomb of Seneb-Kay IV, the tomb of Seneb-Kay. So let me turn to talk about these a little bit. This is an area that we've invested a lot of effort in, as I said, in the last 10 years or so. It's a very challenging area to excavate. You can see the depth of the structures. I mean, these things go down. This particular one is about 10 meters below the desert surface, cut down into the sand, into the hard substrate that you encounter as you go deeper. Below this is actually limestone. As you go deeper and deeper, the limestone of the base of the cliff actually extends under the desert in this area. But this view shows the tomb of Seneb-Kay IV. You can see the massive structures here, torn apart by these later stone robbers, as I was talking about. Much of the chambers are missing. The walls of the chambers and the whole roofing system is gone. So you're kind of looking at the guts of a royal tomb that's had the upper parts all torn away, but nevertheless is still preserved in quite an impressive state of preservation. This is the burial chamber here with a lid and a blocking stone. The chamber itself is actually down under that. So we've been excavating these for a good number of years. This is just actually another view of what you just saw, looking down into the remnants of the tomb of Seneb-Kay IV, one of these large 13th dynasty tombs, and just another view of the process of excavation inside of these. This is actually the entrance passage that takes you down into the burial chamber, which is below this quartzite, this reddish, purplish red stone here is a blocking stone that blocks the entrance. This is actually the passageway that would originally connect into that burial chamber. So we've been systematically excavating these for quite a period of time. And one of the really fascinating discoveries that was very surprising, we really did not predict this back when it happened, was the discovery of these second intermediate period royal tombs. We excavated a couple of these things. We found kind of the robbed out shells or remnants of a couple of them. And then in 2014, we came upon this one, which is the decorated tomb of this king named Woser-Ibre Seneb-Kay. You can see the limestone chamber with painted decoration, with divine figures, one of the standing figures of the goddess Isis right here. You can see the cartouche containing the name of Seneb-Kay. And the inscriptions and decoration of the burial chamber were very important in identifying this king, who was actually an entirely unknown king in ancient Egypt. He was a lost pharaoh that suddenly emerged into history when we found his tomb. As often happens in a place like this, you never guess what you're going to find, and really the beginnings of a nice discovery, an important discovery, are usually quite humble. This was the beginnings of the tomb of Seneb-Kay. You can see this brick structure as it was emerging in 2014, the deep debris over the top of it. We had no idea what this was going to be. At the point this photograph was taken, we still didn't know what it was. This is me sitting in front of what turned out to be the broken portcullis, or blocked entrance into the sequence of chambers that takes you into the chamber of Seneb-Kay. Just to go back to it, I'll just mention my wife Jennifer actually took this photograph. I didn't know what I was looking at. I was puzzling this broken doorway, and she, of course, had to ask me a very famous question in Egyptology, which is the question, what do you see? And anyone that knows the history of Egyptology knows that this question was asked back in 1922 of Howard Carter when he was gazing in through the hole, the break in the doorway into the tomb of Tutankhamun, and he responded, "Wonderful things." So I was staring at a pile of sand and a broken doorway. I didn't see anything. But of course I said, well, of course I see wonderful things. And it did in fact turn out to be a wonderful tomb interior, the tomb of the lost pharaoh, Seneb-Kay. So they see some of the painted decoration, which gives us his name, his identity, which was really fundamental and enable us to anchor him historically in the second intermediate period through the art style and other elements of the tomb, artifacts associated with it. A lot of evidence emerged from this tomb, including the remains of the king himself. We retrieved most of his skeleton and were able to determine that he was a king who died in battle during the second intermediate period. Some of the details of the inscriptions, which were very informative. There again, the cartouche and some of the blue painted texts on this sort of yellow band, which we'll return to in just a second, which are, well, we'll turn to right now. But I mentioned these for a reason, because they will tie in just a second to our new discovery, our recently discovered royal tomb. Here you see some of just one part of these inscriptions in the tomb of Seneb-Kay. Really beautiful, short but beautiful statements, basically invoking or calling upon the king. You can read it yourself there. I'll just go through it quickly. The good God. It actually should be read probably, "Oh, good God, Lord of the two lands, Lord of ritual, King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Woserib Re, son of Re, Seneb-Kay, beloved of Quebec Senuef, lift yourself up," kind of calling upon the king to raise himself up in the afterlife within these confines of the burial chamber, kind of envisioning the afterlife of the king. This tomb of Seneb-Kay is one of just a group of 8 tombs in the vicinity. So very close to it, we excavated a series of additional tombs, none of which had names, they had no decoration. There were remnants of the burial equipment, very badly robbed out, but very small remnants that indicated richly equipped royal burials of the same time frame as Seneb-Kay. Some of the tombs were a lot larger. Most of them were actually larger than Seneb-Kay. This is the largest one that we found in that area, with a big monolithic burial chamber. You can see the depth of it. And you can see the structure of these tombs. They basically are kind of a sequence of chambers descending in the innermost kind of end of the tomb, which is the southern part of it, to the burial chamber itself. They have a sort of passage structure to them in most cases. And often an entrance staircase or ramp system that goes down to them. So this is the basic structure of them. What we were able to understand about these tombs in the process of excavating them is that they date to a really interesting period called the Hyksos period of ancient Egypt. This is the later part of Egypt's second intermediate period. The normal way that this period is kind of presented in histories of ancient Egypt is that Egypt was broken apart basically into 2 kingdoms. A northern kingdom, which was the Hyksos kingdom that predominantly controlled the delta and the northern part of the Nile Valley. And then the upper part of Egypt, Upper Egypt, that was controlled by Thebes. And so this is the division of Egypt into these 2 kind of rival kingdoms. What the Abydos dynasty, which we discovered, in fact, in the process of excavating these tombs, tells us is that the breakup, the political fragmentation of Egypt in the course of the second intermediate period was much more kind of severe for a period of time. There was a phase of time where Egypt was actually broken into 4 different regions or kingdoms that include the Hyksos, the 13th dynasty in its final stages, this Abydos dynasty, which is the group of kings we've been excavating at Anubis Mountain from the second intermediate period, and then further to the south, the Theban kingdom. Eventually, in the final stages of the second intermediate period, what happened was these two kingdoms, the 15th dynasty or the Hyksos and the 17th dynasty, kind of coalesced, kind of absorbed kind of the surrounding regions. And you do have these two kind of kingdoms emerging, eventually vying for power. And the 17th dynasty eventually defeated the Hyksos and reunified Egypt. But before that actually happened, there's this fascinating, very kind of fragmentary political phase where Egypt is broken apart into kind of a group of kind of warring states, essentially. And the Abydos dynasty, this group of kings that we've been excavating at Anubis Mountain, is part of this, this picture. So we published the results of Seneb-Kay and that group of tombs in 2021. This is the volume, if you're interested in reading all the details of the analysis. And I kind of thought we were done with the Abydos dynasty. You know, it really seemed we sort of exhaustively excavated this area where right around Seneb-Kay, except one of the things that you'll notice in the disposition of these tombs is that these guys that were building these smaller royal tombs in the Second Intermediate period, including Seneb-Kay here, were making use of these pre-existing enclosures. These were big brick enclosures that were very convenient spaces for adding new royal tombs. They were interested in adding their tombs to the existing spaces of these 13th dynasty kings. And let's turn now to look at this structure. Look at the size of this enclosure. This is a tomb enclosure that contains a very large stone-built structure that we attribute to this king Neferhotep I. Look at the scale of the interior of this. This is what we turned to just this last year to do, again, a systematic investigation of these what are up until recently have been unexcavated spaces. We've been excavating completely the tomb of this King Neferhotep I. You can see the process of excavation underway. This is a structure that we had worked on before. One of a Penn PhD, Don McCormack, a number of years ago, back in the early 2000s, had worked on the core of this structure in here, but it had been left for many, many years. And so we decided to reopen it, to really kind of fully excavate it again, to prepare it for a visitor building, but then also to investigate what's around it. And lo and behold, as we went down through the sand in one part of this enclosure, it turned out to be much more interesting than we could have guessed. As you can see, there's not much sand to contend with in these excavations out here in the desert at the base of the cliffs. As I put in there, it's a case of mind over matter. It can be quite daunting. Meters and meters of sand deposits, which you feel sort of a sense of despair when you start to excavate something like this. It seems like it will never end. But it's really just a matter of manpower and organization and time and money, but it does eventually get you there. And here you see the excavations of the core of this tomb of Neferhotep I. Looks very similar in structure to the one I showed you before of Seneb-Hotep IV. And over here, you see the area that turned out to be very interesting. This is an orthomosaic. It's it's an image produced through photogrammetry, done by Ayman Damarani and Roland Long, who I showed you earlier. But you can see this massive 13th dynasty royal tomb. And over here, you see this oval kind of pit. This is what we turned our attention to this last season, just off of this stone entrance in the corner of the brick enclosure. Were indications that tomb robbers had gone down in ancient times into some structure. And as we peeled the sand away, going down deeper and deeper, it got more and more interesting. We could see there was a really massive structure tucked in to the corner of the enclosure here. It went deeper and deeper, and you can see the brick walls, really massive, going down 7 meters below the modern surface, where we encountered the major chambers of this tomb, and finally the burial chamber, which you see down here. So this is the tomb that we discovered, the one I started with. This is the the just discovered, just identified tomb of yet another second intermediate period king. He belongs to the same time frame as Seneb-Kay and those other tombs, but his tomb is way, way bigger. This is a tomb that they invested a lot of effort in building. It has this massive limestone burial chamber, a series of brick chambers that were originally had massive vaults over them. Unfortunately, they were broken through in ancient times by tomb robbers, and then an entrance shaft, which you see here. So just some views of it. And something that was very exciting was on the entrance to the burial compartments, like in Seneb-Kay's tomb, where there's that paint decoration, there are remnants of images in polychrome paint. We have images of goddesses standing on either side, and just the bare remnants of columns that contain the name and titles of the king. Remember that passage I highlighted that invokes the king. It names the king and calls upon him to rise up in the afterlife. We think those very same texts would have existed here. We can actually see that it's the base of that same type of inscription. And so the name of the king originally was written there, was decorating the doorway. Tomb robbers, unfortunately, did a lot of damage to this tomb. It seems to have attracted them. The scale of it is quite massive, and it must have been very richly equipped. But the overall structure, I mean, it follows what we saw before with this sort of passage, basic kind of linear passage type structure, ending in the stone burial chamber. It's the same architectural sequence, but at much larger scale. Whose name was recorded here? This is one of the big questions that we were rather frustrated with tomb robbers. I have to say, there were a lot of curse words that were uttered when we found this, and you can just see the remnants of the goddess. Her arms are raised up here, but this is one of these yellow text bands. Whose name was originally recorded here? We have a number of possibilities. So one thing we know about for the Second Intermediate period is there are some interesting kings that left us a few scattered monuments at Abydos. You see three of them here, a king called Senayib, another called Paencheni, and one called Wepwaut Emsaf. One of these kings is probably, I mean, any three of these kings, but quite possibly the one you see on the upper left-hand side, this king Senayib, would be really good contenders, really good possibilities for the owner of this tomb. So in the process of excavating it, we were really kind of hoping for any shreds or fragments of remains of objects that might bear the identity of the king. So we have persons of interest. We don't yet have the identity of this king, but what we are searching for is his position within the sequence of these Abydos dynasty kings. I'm fairly convinced that he's probably a king who falls very early in the sequence. And so we may be looking actually at the kind of the early origins. One king, there may be additional ones, who falls at the very beginning of the line of rulers that then continues with Seneb-Kay and the other tombs. So this is something that we'll be investigating coming up. Just a close-up of the area of the tomb. It's officially called CS16, the Tomb of the Unknown King. But this diagram just shows you, this is what we've excavated inside of the tomb enclosure of Neferhotep I. The new Abydos dynasty tomb, a quite massive structure on its own, the bigger, earlier 13th dynasty structure. But there's this whole yet to be excavated area within this huge enclosure. And so what we are hoping for in the future is completing, we still have yet to complete the periphery of the tomb itself around here, possibly retrieving fragments of material that tomb robbers discarded that could give us the identity of this individual, but also the potential for others, as occurred nearby with Seneb-Kay and the other ones that we excavated before. We may yet find more. So I'm coming to the end here. So one of the things that is often, people do often ask me in a given season is, did you have a favorite object that you discovered in the excavations? So this new royal tomb was very exciting. It was a wonderful thing to find. I do have a favorite object from this last winter, though. That was a really wonderful little thing to find. And you can see it here. It's just a desert pebble. It's a nice sort of flat-shaped kind of flint pebble that someone in ancient times who was building one of these royal tombs decided, oh, I like this pebble and I'm going to write my name on it. It's an ancient little graffito with the name and title of an individual. And you can see the hieroglyphs there in black. It reads, the foreman of the king's crew, Senu. So this is one of the ancient tomb builders, one of the officials probably who was involved in the construction process. So he was an overseer, or what in modern Egypt we call the rais. And so when we found this, I kind of explained it to this guy standing here to my right. This is the major foreman of our excavations, Rais Ashraf Zaidan. He's the head rais. There's a number of other raises. These are all the raises. So they're all the foremen that are in charge of the excavations that we work with. So yeah, the rais means foreman or just headman in Arabic, and the other raises. And I realize it looks like raises in English. That's raises, the plural, anglicized. They often do ask for raises, so that's perhaps not coincidental. Anyway, there they are. So they did love it when I explained, oh, here's the ancient Rais who left his name on this pebble for us to find thousands of years ago. All right, so let me just wrap up very quickly here. So in addition to the excavations, one of the things we're doing at South Abydos, working with the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, in the process of excavating and documenting these huge and fascinating royal tombs that are adding new evidence to the history, the political history of Egypt, we are concerned that we don't just leave them to be reclaimed by the desert. We hope that this place will continue to be of interest in the future. And so we've been investing quite a lot of effort and money over the recent years in preparing the site for visitors. One of the first structures we built was this thing that you see here. This is a visitor building that covers the entrance to the tomb of Senwosret III. There are staircases that take you down, making it accessible for modern visitors. We've done the same thing with the tomb of Seneb-Kay. We did restoration of the masonry, and then conservation work. Here you see some of the team at work. This is one of the Penn Museum conservators, Molly Gleason, who did work on the painted images in the burial chamber. And that whole structure actually is now enclosed. You can see the construction of a visitor building, much like the other one you just saw. And so the tomb of Seneb-Kay, which is a quite modest little tomb, even though it is a king's tomb, is now housed within that, and there's a walkway and railings, and you can look down inside the burial chamber. And this next season, we're going to return the body of the king. His skeleton will be in a vitrine in his burial chamber so that visitors can see him return to his burial chamber for the first time in 3,600 years. Anubis Mountain, if you visit Abydos, if you go to Egypt, you can actually make arrangements with the inspectors, the Antiquities Office at Abydos will allow you to go up there. You have to pay a special ticket usually. It's not on the normal track for tourists, but it is accessible. And in coming years, we're in the process of actually doing the foundation work for 2 new visitor buildings over the tombs of Sobek-Hotep IV and Nefer-Hotep I, which is the one near the just discovered tomb. So as we continue to peel back the sands and hopefully find new evidence on the history of Egypt in this period, we're opening these tombs for visitors. Okay, so I'm out of time, but I think we may have some time for questions.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. There's so many questions. So we'll get right to it. What you said you had local workers and people. What do they think of all these discoveries?
They have a lot of interest in it. They often ask questions. We often host groups of Egyptians and visitors from the Antiquities Ministry. They do hope, I think, to see Abydos be a place that's like some other parts of Egypt, is well protected, is a place that will be visited by more and more people. Abydos is still kind of off the beaten track, compared to places like Luxor or the sites up near Cairo, Giza, the pyramids, for instance. But yeah, so there's concern for kind of the protection and awareness of the site for the long term, but also kind of the locally the economic potential. I think people see that as being something that they would hope for in the future. But for the time being, I mean, they're interested in the work. We continue to employ a lot of the same guys. They come back year after year. Most of them are local farmers that just live nearby, and so when we work there, they take time off from working in the fields or whatever else they're doing to work in the excavations. So there are some of them right there in the photograph.
Perfect. Do you think your work will ever be featured in the Grand Egyptian Museum?
So the Grand Egyptian Museum, is a place where a lot of the sort of the highlight objects, many of which used to be in the Cairo Museum, the Egyptian Museum at Tahrir Square. Many of them were moved there. The Grand Egyptian Museum was conceived as like a highlight museum for the treasures of Tutankhamun. A lot of the beautiful statues that have adorned the Egyptian Museum. It is a place where any major discoveries of things that are intact would probably end up. A lot of what we find in sites like this are fragments. So we do have the sort of the process of piecing things together, kind of understanding and extrapolating from fragments of damaged objects. But yeah, we do always hope for one of those kinds of discoveries that might end out in the Grand Egyptian Museum.
Awesome. Do you see any kind of like pattern to which tombs were grouped into which enclosures at all?
There certainly is. There's a patterning, and we think it's probably chronological. It seems that they probably kind of in sequence chose one and then moved to the next one. What I think right now is that the biggest of those enclosures, the enclosure of Neferhotep I tomb, that might have been the first one that in the Second Intermediate Period was chosen. So this very large tomb of the mystery pharaoh, that seems to be the earliest one that we know about. If there are more of them within that large unexcavated expanse, we may have like an early group of kings, and then they moved further north, which is locally north and west, let's say. So into the area where Seneb-Kay and that other group are. So yeah, I think there probably is a chronological growth over time, or kind of movement in the use of the enclosures. But yeah, we still have yet to kind of fully understand it.
Has there been any DNA analysis on the mummy skeletons you've been finding?
No, we haven't done DNA analysis. We did detailed osteological skeletal documentation and analysis and study, which is published in the volume on Seneb-Kay and the Lost Dynasty.
Excellent. I think, Joe, maybe you can email this to me. Someone's asking for non-academics, what books or resources are recommended for information on Abydos and ancient Egypt in general. So would you have like one book you might really like? If you love ancient Egypt, you should get this.
Okay. I guess I could just off the top of my head just mention it. There's a great book by my former advisor, who was at Penn for many years, David O'Connor, wrote a Thames and Hudson book. called Abydos and the Cult of the First Pharaohs, or the Abydos and the Cult of Osiris and the First Pharaohs. I forget exactly the wording of the title, but you can find it on any any book website. It's often in bookstores. It's a good overview of Abydos. It's a little bit out of date. It hasn't been updated with recent discoveries for quite a while, but it's a great introduction to Abydos.
Excellent, thank you. How far below the surface were the tombs? They look quite deep, or did they get buried over time?
Yeah, so the earlier ones that we found, Seneb-Kay, and those ones, they were under very quite large debris mounds, let's say. So to get down to the level we encountered them took a lot of effort. Seneb-Kay actually was about a month of excavation, going down to the point where we could begin to actually see anything that was, we might describe as intact. But below, as far as below the kind of the ancient surface, they weren't very deep originally. They went down, let's say, about 2-3 meters. The deepest one is probably 4 meters. And originally, the architecture rose relatively close to the surface, and we think that there were superstructures. They could have had probably small brick pyramids, and then possibly an offering place. There's indications that there were small pyramids on top of at least 2 of them. So yeah, those were not particularly deep compared to some of these other bigger tombs, like the 13th dynasty ones. And this other and just recently discovered tomb is it's a bigger version. It's much bigger, much deeper. Again, it's 7 meters down to the burial chamber.
What technology do you think they had or used to build these tombs?
It was, I mean, well-organized manpower. They had stonemasons that were familiar with cutting and fitting blocks. They used gypsum mortar for joining blocks. You can actually see it in this photograph here. There's you can see the joints of these big limestone blocks. There's that white mortar, that's gypsum. I mean, they were very accomplished builders. They were masters also of mud brick. So a lot of the structures have brick components. They were very capable of building huge walls and vaults and arches in mud brick. They're usually plastered with gypsum. So these are all traditional ancient Egyptian building technologies, but there would have been trained groups of builders, and in many cases royal builders, that built tombs like these.
Excellent, thank you. There's a couple questions here about earlier in the lecture about tomb robberies. So let me see if I can kind of get them all together. But you mentioned that maybe some of the tomb robberies were state sponsored. Mm-hmm. Is there any evidence of that? Have we ever recovered anything that may have been, robbed from a tomb before?
Yeah, so actually some of the items that we found in Seneb-Kay's tomb, we know came from one of the other royal tombs. They took them out and they repurposed them. Yeah, actually his canopic box, we found his canopic box, which preserved inscriptions, painted inscriptions from an earlier king. And the box was made out of cedar wood, Lebanese cedar, which is a very resilient and non-local wood that would have been prized for its qualities. That these cedar planks from an earlier king's sarcophagus were then reused for Seneb-Kay's canopic box. And we think that some of these other tombs probably were reusing objects that may in fact have come from this very same place in the Second Intermediate period, where kings do not have quite the access to trade routes and were somewhat less wealthy than their predecessors in the Middle Kingdom. They were probably gaining access to gold and other valuable materials from these tombs. So it does seem ironic. Kings were probably being buried in a royal necropolis that they themselves were involved, partially involved in despoiling. We think that was going on. You also see it later on when you get to the New Kingdom and later periods. There's reuse of royal sarcophagi and other objects occasionally.
Thank you. Do you have any sense of tomb size as an indication of actual influence, legacy, or power?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely read the scale of the tomb as a broad reflection of the wealth of the period. You know, the length of reign of the king, I think, is also fundamental. Probably one of the reasons that the second intermediate period tombs are smaller in scale is that many of those kings didn't rule for more than a few years. We think the average reign length in that period is like 3 years. So in a period of political turmoil and conflict, that's also reflected in the size of the tombs that they could build.
Do you have any idea about the influence that Senwosret III did during his reign to merit such a huge tomb?
Yeah, he has a very long reign. It's often considered to be the height of the 12th dynasty, which is a very rich and stable period of ancient Egypt. Senwosret III was a great builder. We have lots of structures built by him. He built a pyramid. In addition to his tomb at Abydos, he completed a pyramid up north at the site of Dashur. He built a lot of fortresses down in Nubia. He was very active in military campaigning in Nubia. Some people speculate that he might have actually been injured in fighting in Nubia, which might have led to a co-regency with his son, King Amenemhat III, who also is commemorated at Abydos as well. There may possibly be a tomb structure for him as well that we haven't found yet. So, yeah.
Thank you. Are there any important revelations that may be associated with the inscriptions you showed on some of the walls?
Yeah, it's so we're able to I mean, with Seneb-Kay and then this new tomb. This is one of the interesting things, that this is the period that I mean, Seneb-Kay is actually when he was found, he's the first instance of a king using painted imagery in the burial chamber. Up until this point, tombs are essentially kind of undecorated. If you go back earlier in time to the Pyramid Age, they do have the pyramid texts that were in burial compartments. But the use of painted decoration inside of a royal tomb, this is right when this is appearing. So Seneb-Kay and then this new still unidentified king's tomb are the first instances we actually have of this. So it's beginning the tradition that then continues in the New Kingdom and expands with the Valley of the Kings, where you get extensive wall decoration. So they're interesting texts. They give us identity. They give us ideas, I mean, statements on the concepts of the afterlife of the king. The inscriptions, you know, clearly are reflecting notions of the divine associations of the king in the afterlife and what's going to happen. So yeah, they're interesting both politically and religiously, I guess.
Do you think yeah. Do you think there's any like symbolic significance of the smaller king's tombs being built within a specific king's enclosure? Like, do you think it was just for protection or practicality?
I think it's practicality. I think they were making use of walled spaces that were convenient. You know, they were all already demarcated spaces with sizable enclosure walls that were certainly still intact at that point in time. So it's a good place to build. I don't know that we can say that they were interested in linking themselves specifically with one or the other of the earlier kings.
Excellent. Right, and what leads you to believe this tomb is the earliest?
So what we have is the most compelling thing that we have to look at this point is the architecture. So the architecture is quite interesting. The basic format, the basic structure, as I showed you, follows the basic kind of linear progression of the other tombs, but at much larger scale. One of the things that we can see about it, though, is that the format of the burial chamber is a little bit different. It has a recessed canopic niche. It was a setting in the wall on the eastern side of the tomb, which would have housed the canopic burial, so the canopic chest and the canopic jars. The scale, the layout of the burial chamber is very, very similar to some earlier 13th dynasty royal tombs. And the kind of indication of that is that what we're looking at is a kind of a transformation of late Middle Kingdom into second intermediate periods kind of architectural styles. And so that this tomb is kind of a transition between the 13th dynasty and then the more developed second intermediate period tombs that we have, like Seneb-Kay. Yeah, there's some specific tombs that seem to be kind of forerunners to the design of this one.
And yeah, maybe basically on that line, are you seeing that the tombs are constructed in the same methods, materials, equipment? Or are you seeing technological advances as you excavate?
Yeah, there aren't technological advances per se. They're using the same materials and building techniques. What differs is the scale of construction from tomb to tomb. Some of the details of how it's put together. Seneb-Kay's tomb, for instance, was built. We can see that it was built extensively with reused blocks that were taken from other buildings. I didn't talk about that, but many of the blocks have inscriptions and decoration on them from earlier buildings that they were taken from and then constructed very quickly. When the king died in battle, and unexpectedly, they had to build the tomb quickly. Some of the other tombs have different use of kind of different types of stone masonry that's used. One of the tombs has a monolithic massive multi-ton chamber. So yeah, they all vary. They're all sort of slightly different, but those same basic techniques. There's no advancement, let's say, in technology that we can see.
And Joe, remind us, what is the period in time in which you excavate? Someone's asking.
When we work in the fields?
No, is it the Bronze Age in Egypt? What period in Egypt?
Oh yeah, so the Middle Kingdom and the Second Intermediate period are part of the Middle Bronze Age. So the time frame of the Anubis Mountain necropolis is 1850 to about 1600, 1550 BC at the latest, the end of the Second Intermediate period. So it goes up to the very beginning of the late Bronze Age. With the transition to the New Kingdom, which is about 1550 BC, you move from the Middle Bronze Age to the late Bronze Age.
Excellent, thank you. And are you going back out again? What are you looking to find? What are you hoping for?
Yeah, so we usually work in Egypt twice a year. In the summertime and in the wintertime between semesters. So we usually go out for like a 6-week season at some point in the summertime. It's usually quite hot, so 6 weeks is about all we can handle. And yeah, we come back exhausted, and then we have to start the fall semester usually right after that. The winter is a beautiful time to be in Egypt. So for those of you who haven't been there, it's very much like the climate of Arizona, the desert Southwest. It's drier. It really doesn't rain at all, but it's actually in the winter you get really nice pleasant days, cool nights. It could go down into the 30s Fahrenheit sometimes. Usually not that cold, but in the summertime, it doesn't usually get quite as hot as Arizona. It's typically like Highs are like 100 to 110 degrees. Sometimes it can go more for brief periods, but usually like around 110 for a high.
Wow. Good luck with that. Yeah, well, I think we've time for about 2 more questions. Any book recommendation for second intermediate period? They've only read River God by Wilbur Smith.
Okay. Yeah, there's a number. I mean, second intermediate period is probably not so well represented in kind of the broader Egyptological literature. I mean, it is there's a lot of special studies and volumes dedicated to the second intermediate period. Let me see. I mean, I guess if you want to kind of delve into it, probably a good source would be one of the overall histories, the recent histories of ancient Egypt. So something like the Oxford History of Ancient Egypt, the chapter on the second intermediate period gives a good overview of history and also the archaeology. There's the very good history introduction to ancient Egypt. The title is The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt by Toby Wilkinson, which is actually, I think it was a New York Times bestseller. It's quite a good readable book. He has a good chapter also. So yeah, those would be decent overviews. Beyond that, it's probably more specialized literature.
And our last question then, do you have evidence or thoughts on additional just tomb discoveries out there that you're looking forward to?
At Anubis Mountain?
Yeah, on your work, Abydos, yeah.
Yeah, there's things I didn't talk about. We're working in some other areas that are quite interesting, let's say, and we have yet to see what there turns out to be there.
We'll just have to tune back in and maybe next year, right?
Perhaps.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Joe, for sharing your amazing work with us. Thank you for everyone for tuning in with us. We really appreciate you. Check out Penn Museum for more information. I put a link in the chat if you want to really support the work of the Penn Museum and the work that Joe does. I put a link in there for giving. And thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.